So this talk is called Einstein Wrong. This was a talk I presented in 2015 to, I think, a Science Cafe club, and I've now expanded it. First of all, I will need to deal with the issue that many supporters of Einstein's relativity will say things like Einstein's relativity is proven by experiment. Sometimes they recognise that proven is not the correct word to use, and they will say something similar like Einstein's relativity theory is confirmed by experiment or supported by experiments and so forth. By saying this, they think there's empirical evidence confirming their belief in relativity, when really what happens is most of them don't realise about the issue of underdetermination. So this is Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy dealing with the issue of underdetermination, and what it means is empirical evidence, experiments and so forth, can be interpreted by different theories. Those who are supporters of Einstein's relativity tend to overlook that the experiments they claim support Einstein's relativity can be interpreted by other theories. It seems to be a bias in the teaching of Einstein's relativity that students are not taught about these other theories in competition with Einstein, and they're just taught about Einstein's relativity. When I inquired about this, the answer I got back from the educators was they were paid to teach relativity and not paid to teach the other theories. This bias in the teaching of relativity students often leads those students to grow up thinking there are no competing theories, and thus have a strong faith in Einstein's relativity. So the idea that Einstein's relativity is proven by experiments is false. If such a statement were true, then it would be a very strong claim, and it would be the end of the story with no need to talk about the competing theories. Instead, the reality is the much weaker claim. Experiments are interpreted by Einstein's relativity. And that is weak because experiments can be interpreted by other theories. Given such a weak claim, it can then be pointed out that often the interpretations of experiments by Einstein's relativity does not make sense, and the experiments can be interpreted by other theories that make a great deal more sense. And that is one of the main criticisms of those opposing Einstein's relativity, that it does not make sense, and experiments can be interpreted by better theories. Now on to the issue of the movement by people that disagree with Einstein's relativity. This film was made by distance and was blocked at film festivals. The film producer was David DeHilser. Despite mainstream blocking some things said about Einstein being wrong, there still appears articles saying he was probably wrong, such as this Scientific American article, and it says quantum weirdness defies special relativity. There has been a long tradition of saying Einstein is wrong, such as this person here, Leonard, said it was wrong. And then there's this person here, Professor Dingle, who also said Einstein was wrong in about the 1960s. He was an English physicist and philosopher of science who served as president of the Royal Astronomical Society from 1951 to 1953. And even a strong opposition to Einstein from such a prominent person tends to get ignored. Now, this person, John Wheeler, he's Professor of Relativity, and he's a supporter of Einstein's relativity, and a lot of the teaching of modern relativity comes via the teaching of Professor Wheeler. And this is one of my friends, Dr. Lowe, who points out that Wheeler got things wrong. His paper is called The Errors of the Wheeler School, the Distortion to General Relativity and the Damage to Education at MIT Open Courses in Physics. Then there's also Roger Rydin. He's a Professor of Nuclear Engineering, and he also says that Einstein is wrong. And then we have this person who's Stephen Crothers, and he's got quite a few videos on the internet saying that Einstein is wrong. There's another Professor of Physics, Reg Cahill, saying that Einstein is wrong. Then there's this GPS engineer, Ron Hatch, who says Einstein is wrong. So there are a lot of people saying Einstein is wrong, but they mostly get ignored. When it comes to teaching physics students about relativity, one of the many things that gets omitted in what is taught to them is the dissent with Einstein's relativity. There is a lot of people saying Einstein is wrong, but that point of view gets mainly ignored. This is Ian McCausland. He's a Professor of Electrical Engineering, and he says Einstein is wrong. This talk is at that address. It's called Reviewing the Riddle of Relativity. His paper, Reviewing the Riddle of Relativity, says I describe my collaboration with Professor Herbert Dingle in his campaign against special relativity theory, and my subsequent attempts to draw attention to the inadequate response by scientists to this criticism. So he's agreeing with Professor Dingle, who was mentioned earlier. Picking up some of the things that Ian says, in his arguments about the special relativity problem, Dingle chose as his canonical text Einstein's original paper on the subject published in the Annual Physics in 1905 and later an English translation in 1923. So Einstein's 1905 paper is the first paper that Einstein wrote on special relativity. And the trouble with going by Einstein in 1905 is some of the things said then by Einstein have been changed, and I've pointed that out in several of my videos about moving of the goalposts. For example, one of my talks is special relativity, moving goalpost example, acceleration. It's very difficult to tie special relativity down as one clear definitive theory because amendments keep getting made to it, and that is one of the major problems with arguing about relativity. Things keep changing on the pro-relativity side. Einstein's relativity is vague. The basic idea is the speed of light in vacuum is a constant, and that is a vague idea. And special relativity is when consider constant velocity motion, and general relativity when consider acceleration, gravity. But it all becomes ambiguous. It would say different things. First, I thought some people misunderstood Einstein's relativity while others didn't, but then checking back with Einstein, and he keeps changing his mind. So it all starts with Einstein, really. So Einstein wrong. Einstein keeps changing his mind, and it's unclear what change of mind is the correct one to take. Plus, the big issue is with combining Einstein's relativity with quantum physics, which remains unsolved in the mainstream. I know the problem with Einstein, and saying experiments confirm Einstein is no help, because in the write-ups of the experiments it is never clear which version of Einstein change of mind they mean by his relativity. So I just go back to the 18th century physics, where there is none of this confusion that Einstein created, and I go with Boskowicz's theory. While others who say Einstein is wrong take different paths and try different amendments. As far as the mainstream is concerned, they like to mock those who say Einstein is wrong. But Einstein is wrong because it's unclear what he means after all this changes of mind. Thank you, and that's the end of this little talk and my thesis. Einstein wrong because he changes his mind. So this is my talk for 2015, tidied it up a bit, and I'm hoping to do another one for 2022. Thank you, the end.